Hello and welcome to the ROPESCAST, the independent voice of the Middle East. I'm Ksenia Svetlova, your host. ROPE stands for the Regional Organization for Peace, Economics and Security. We are a young organization dedicated to laying the groundwork for a post-conflict Middle East. We do this by connecting forward-thinking Israeli and Palestinian emerging leaders with like-minded peers across the Middle East. At ROPES, we share a holistic vision for our region, one where every individual has far more to gain from regional integration and conflict resolution than they have to lose. For more information on our work, please visit our website at ropes.org. And joining us today is Dr. Ahmed Khuzaie, a political consultant, visiting professor of political science and international affairs focusing on Arab Gulf states. Ahmed is the managing partner of political consultancy firm Khuzaie Associates LLC. He as well serves as an expert with the N7 Foundation, contributing analysis on Gulf affairs and the evolving landscape of the Abraham Accords. Ahmed is an ambassador of BPUR at the United Nations and the White House. As well, he's a regular contributor to major international media outlets and writes a highly regarded weekly column on international affairs for Al Ayam newspaper. Hello, Ahmed, and welcome to the ROPESCAST. It's so good to have you.
Always good to be with you, Ksenia.
Thank you so much. So there are so many things on our plate. I don't know where to start, but maybe, we'll start with just checking up on you. You are a Bahraini. You spent a sizable amount of your time in Bahrain. Also, you're in the US. How are you doing? How is your family, friends? How were you affected by the war with Iran?
Well, it's safe to say that this war is unprecedented. I mean, we've never faced such an open war across the Gulf throughout all our lives. As a Bahraini citizen, a Gulf national, this has been something we've never experienced before. It's something we see on the news, something we hear about, something we read about in history even, but never came across. Yes, the first Gulf War, the second Gulf War happened, but did not affect every Gulf country like that before. That being said, the first few days of the war were very scary for us. We don't understand the sounds. We don't know how is it going to affect us. To see civilians being affected, despite what the news outlets are promoting, the Iranian propaganda who says we're targeting Israeli and American interests in the region, which was not true. So it gave us a glimpse of how the world works if you are on the other side of it. And that was hard. Now the war has stopped ever since the ceasefire. We could say positively that now the implications of the war started to show up economically, security-wise. We've all been following the news, and we see what's going on, especially when we're talking about the sleeper cells, the proxies, the militias, which is the ripple of dealing with Iran to start with.
Well, we also hear from the Iranian side, they continue threatening Bahrain and specifically targeting Bahrain. There were statements by Iranian officials during the war that Bahrain is, it might be a target for even an invasion of Iran, and they want to annex it. And also now, during the ceasefire, we hear it. Why is Bahrain being singled out like this by Iran?
These statements, these threats did not start during the war or briefly before the war. I've dated them back at least 150 years ago. When the British presence in the region was there, they wanted to have Bahrain as part of a deal, to have Bahrain and what used to be called Arabistan. Arabistan is the complete eastern side of the Gulf. The eastern shores of the Gulf used to be an Arab state until the mountains, and then beyond the mountains was Persia, or known today as Iran. As part of a deal with Great Britain, they took Arabistan, known as Ahwaz as well, in 1925, and they executed their sheikh, their leader, Sheikh Khazal al-Kabi, in the town square in Tehran briefly after that. Part of that, they wanted to take Bahrain, although it was much difficult for them to do that because throughout history, it was not possible. And when when they wanted to strike a deal with the Brits. Of course, the Saudis were there, and they felt that this is a betrayal to them, especially that we're talking about the drive from Bahrain to Saudi today on the causeway. We are separated by a small pond of sea, basically. It takes less than 20 minutes. So we're that close to Saudi. So if we're talking politically, culturally, everything, this is one part of it. Although they are persistent and they kept on doing that. And in the 50s, they started threatening to go back to international stage, basically, especially through the United Nations. And they failed. And in 1971, when Great Britain decided to leave the Middle East, as most of the countries in the Middle East and beyond celebrate their independence in 1971 or around that time. It was the time when the United Nations basically ruled out Bahrain's petition to be an independent Arab state. Of course, it was the days of the Shah, and basically he agreed to it, and he was the first person to congratulate Bahrain. Yet after the Islamic Revolution in 1979, they made sure to bring that back on the table and start demanding to have Bahrain as their own, and they kept it part of their constitution, as well as calling it their 14th state. And ever since, until today, and we're talking about 46, 47 years ago, basically, they started staging coup d'etat in 1981, and in the 90s, they supported lots of riots. And we've seen everything that happened in Bahrain since 2011 with what was supposed to be called the Arab Spring. Today, we see that back on the stage, especially that the moment the Iranians started attacking Bahrain, their proxies in town started to instigate some demonstrations, and basically locally and international media as well, calling for them to join Iran as a non-independent state, which the majority of the Bahrainis and the Gulf will never allow that.
So I have a question about that, Ahmed. So we know it just from looking at the Wikipedia, the facts about Bahrain. The majority of the population is Shia, but they are Bahraini. They are not Iranian. So there might be some individuals, and we hear about the Bahraini security forces operations against Iranian cells, and so on. But some people automatically assume that if the population part of it is Shia, then they might have some allegiance towards Iran, so can you enlighten us about that?
Of course. Just like you mentioned, it's written on Wikipedia, and that's not correct. Coming from a Shiite family myself, I confirm that the Shia are not the majority. There's nothing that supports that claim. There are no numbers that supports that claim. It's just an allegation that they've been putting forward as part of the same propaganda. We, as a maximum, and these are estimations, as a maximum, we're talking about 45%, right? I have written a full book about that. I encourage everybody to read it. I would love to send copies, whoever likes that too, as well.
I would personally would love to read it, yes, because
perfectly, I'll do that. So the whole propaganda started as the unclarity of what we want to do with that. So it's not just about a claim to say that we are the majority or not. Why I mentioned the book is that the mosaic of the Bahraini culture, a Bahraini picture, let's put it that way, is not as simple as it is. Yes, Bahrain is a small country compared to other countries, yet it's not as simple as it gets. So in my book, what I delve into is explain the mosaic of this society. So if we're talking about Arabs, first of all, this is the majority of the inhabitants of the island. If we're talking about Arabs, we're talking about few fragments. We're talking about Muslims. We're talking about non-Muslims. We have Christians, we have Jews, we have Bahrain actually hosts the oldest and the only indigenous Jewish community in the Gulf states, by the way. Yeah. When it comes to Arabs, as I said, we have Muslims. Of course, the majority of the island are Muslims, split between Shiites and Sunnites. Then we have a minority of Christians, then minority of Jews, and other denominations. That's one. Then we have the Persians, who are Shiites and Sunnites. So not all of the Persians in Bahrain or Persian descents in Bahrain are Shiites. Then we're talking about the Afro-Arabs, we're talking about the Indians, we're talking about the Southeast Asians and other denominations. So it's not as clear or not as simple as this. That's for one. When it comes to the allegiance to Iran, for example, that started briefly during the 50s and the 60s as a way to fight the British colonials. And then from there developed into political parties, but they were underground. Political parties around the Gulf states are only allowed in one state, and that's in Bahrain since 2002. So since they are not allowed, they went underground. Some of them, of course, adapted the Shiism, others adapted Sunnism. And then we were talking about the leftism, which was very famous back in the day, pan-Arab nationalism. We're talking about Leninist and basically other schools of thoughts when it comes to the left. All of that being said, in 2002, when the current king ascended to the throne, he decided that, you know what, no more underground. Let's bring everything to the surface through a proper political movement. And that, through that, basically, the two-chambered parliament was established, along with our own Magna Carta, I call it, basically, which is a document that was signed under the name of the National Charter. Under the goal by His Majesty the King to eliminate all previous issues between all aspects of the community, to bring everybody under the same roof, and then to start afresh. The problem was on day one, the pro-Iranian camp, as we call them, they are the Islamist Shiites political denominations. Basically started creating problems from day one. They were the ones who called the people to sign the national charter, and it was at 97 something percent of the population agreed to it. And then the next day they felt, no, we have to boycott the elections. And then problems came back on the surface again.
And what is their political will? Do they want to join Iran as a republic, as
Yes.
autonomy? I don't know, as
Yes, basically they started calling Bahrain as the Islamic State, the Islamic Republic of Bahrain, which is to be considered part of Iran, but somehow semi-independent. And they called for that in 2011.
Oh, I see. So, the plot is getting thicker. Do you think that also right now, I mean, every Gulf country was hit and pounded by Iran during the war, even the Omanis, who used to be the mediators and so on. But Bahrain was really heavily hit, So I looked at the numbers, less maybe heavy than Emirates, but also very significantly. A lot of damages and so on. Do you think that there was also kind of a vengeance against Bahrain for joining the Abraham Accords? Was this element present as well?
That being said, I remember after the Accords, I started monitoring the Iranian media even more heavily than before. I even published a book about the Iranian interventions in Bahrain. Ever since the Accords, for the first 4 years, there were at least three national statements from Iran towards Bahrain saying, we will bomb Bahrain, we will take Bahrain back, we will invade Bahrain. They've been threatening every single day, even more than before, because Bahrain signed the Accords. So to answer your question, yes, it somehow accelerated their means and intentions.
Ahmed, I remember my first visit to Bahrain. I was a very young journalist back in 2003 during the war with Iraq.
Yes.
And I was sent there just, to wait for the war, I guess, to begin. And indeed, it broke out just a few days later. And I remember that the Bahrainis back then in Manama, they were exercising going to the shelters because
Yes.
there was this fear of Iraqi weapons at the time. It was not clear, what Saddam will do. Will he retribute against his Arab neighbors? And so on. But I remember it vividly. There were some sirens also, like a drill or something like this. But thanks God at the time, nothing happened. So just, coming back from the beginning of our conversation, I just can imagine how traumatic it was. Is there any kind of thought in Bahrain to, I don't know, build more shelters right now? Because after all, Iran is not going away and its regime is still maybe hurt badly, but still there. So do you think that you might want to reorganize somehow, like better, if, the situation will repeat?
Just like you mentioned, in during the let's call it the second war, or the second Gulf War, and then from there in or the third, because during the 2000s, basically with Iraq, and then in 1990 between Kuwait and Iraq, and prior to that between Iraq and Iran, all of these were somehow away from us. So the needs for these shelters were minimal somehow. Today, that's different. I haven't heard anything official about that, but I think locally, because all the Gulf leaders, when they met in Jeddah, and even prior to that, started hinting that things after the war won't be the same as they were before when it comes to whom we deal with, whom we consider friend and who's a foe. And I've seen everything, especially, I mean, everybody read and heard around the media outlets over the past 3 weeks how the Gulf states started exposing, capturing, and imprisoning the proxies, the Iranian proxies around the Gulf states. So I support that notion, saying that things won't be the same and we can't deal with the threats like we did before. It has to be more on a stronger stance this time.
Yeah, so and you basically lead me to my next question. The things will not be as before. It is still early, in my opinion, to make assumptions about this war because it's not over yet, and we are still in this no peace, no war kind of limbo,
Yes.
waiting for either negotiations or renewal of hostilities. But for the time being, after 42 days of warfare, and very significant airstrikes against Iran and its targets and its military infrastructure and so on. But you still see the regime of the Ayatollahs is still there. If we will assume, I think it's quite safe to assume that whatever will be the consequences of the next round, this regime will still be there for a time being, maybe hopefully not for long, but for now it's there. What is the balance of this war from the Gulf perspective and specifically from Bahrain perspective? Was it worth it? Was this war, can it be regarded as success in some way, maybe not in every way? What do you think?
If we are being realistic about the whole outlook of the whole war and beyond, let's just bring in one thought. All these missiles and drones were manufactured by the Iranians. If it wasn't for the war, what were they going to use it for? Right? They were going to use it at some point, especially with all the threats towards the region. And here I'm not talking about their threat through the proxies. No, I'm talking about direct war. They were mobilizing anyway. So even if it wasn't for the war, it was about time, or it was about just a matter of time until they do. So that being said, the Gulf states, of course, will always, from now on, expect the worst. So for that, they will always be prepared. We just mentioned, yes, I mean, about the shelters maybe, but if we talk about everything else, we started hearing news coming out of Washington, D.C. over this past week of a restock operation, for example, from the Gulf side to restock on thuds, especially, and other, let's call the products. And that says something that we are expecting the worst. If negotiations go well, if Iran fail, if even they don't, we can never, ever be blindsided again. That's on one hand. On the other hand, we have to be prepared for whatever options and whatever scenarios may arise. So from now on, we will be ready until told otherwise.
Well, I have to tell you that at least, looking from outside of the Gulf, it seemed to me that Bahrain was the least trusting country, towards Iran, and it was always very, very much of Iranian intentions. Unlike some of the countries in the Gulf that opened up completely to the Iranians and maybe were hoping to contain Iran through economic ties, and so on. But Bahrain is, I think, not the least, interested country, and perhaps they were part of the larger trend because if everybody else is going for it for reconciliation with Iran, so you cannot stay outside of that, but I think that you always had your suspicions of the regime, maybe to the degree of that we are, us in Israel, we're feeling that, it's a mortal threat. It's a mortal threat, as Iran is a mortal threat.
It is. If we look at it, Bahrain stopped or basically shut down the Iranian embassy in Bahrain 11 years ago.
No.
And they seized any diplomatic ties, directly or indirectly, with Iran because we tried our best throughout the years. So when the war started, yes, I mean, it's understandable that the other Gulf states wanted to de-escalate through diplomatic means and all that. We did it because we understand and we have 150 years of experience with them, knowing that it will reach nowhere. So to cut it short, this is who we are. We have all the experience. Instead of going and talking to them, we have to think, or we were, and yet still do, thinking about how to retaliate on our terms rather than go on with basically just answering their threats.
Well, while we are recording this episode, the threats are being, hurled and thrown and going back from President Trump, to the Iranians back, who will do what, who will pound what infrastructure. In your opinion, what is the worst case scenario, in this war? Again, looking from Bahrain, looking from the Gulf, and what is the best case scenario? How would you regard it?
In order for us to understand who wins and who loses the war, who wins the war is the country or the countries with least losses, or basically, yes, losses. I mean, looking at it, every country lost something. Iran, for the first time in history, somebody does that. They raise assault against 13 countries at once, right?
Wow.
So when we are calculating what kind of infrastructure that was hit, I'll put it in numbers. The Dubai was estimated as a business value of $117 billion. Considering the size, it's small compared to Tehran, the population, and all that. While Tehran was valued as $55 billion. Compared the size, this is nothing compared to Dubai. So when we say something happened to Dubai, the loss will be more because of the infrastructure per kilometer is calculated. That being said, how vast Iran is, how they struggle today with basics, we could safely say who's hurting more. And that will give us an indication of who's losing more than the other. Of course, none of us, that when I say none of us, I'm talking about the Israelis and us in the Gulf, we don't wish anything bad for the Iranian people. Our fight is with the regime, just like the regime fights us alone, not the Iranian people. So we don't want anything bad to happen for the Iranian people, but we can't avoid it. If they can't put their regime down, somebody else has to. And that's exactly what happened during this war and during the 12-day war. The Gulf states endured big losses, just like Israel and just like the United States today. Nobody can deny that. But who lost more? If we look at it, let's look at it from the food security side. The Iranians are suffering more because the price of an egg today is somehow equivalent to the price of gold. It's I mean, the inflation is very high.
And the situation was not great to begin with.
Exactly. It was not great to begin with. That's number one. Number two, if we're talking about the economy, if we're talking about energy, if we're talking about export and import, it's all dead. Compared to, yes, I mean, of course, we are still in the war. We're not sure if it's over or not, and we're spending lots of money on fixing what happened, on repercussions, on, just like we mentioned before, maybe shelters and all that. That being said, life still is as usual in the Gulf states. So if we compare that, everybody is enduring losses, yet the side that's enduring more losses is the loser here, and hopefully it's not us.
Yes, let's absolutely hope, for that. We were discussing the good scenarios versus not so good scenarios. And again, you mentioned the survival of the regime. I don't know, so many theories were thrown in the beginning about, who will rebel and who will, fall, and how Khamenei elimination, will affect all of that. And, frankly, I was not an optimist. I didn't
Yes.
think the regime will fall. It can happen in the long term, though. because it is, a regime that is on decline and so on. But for now, it seems that, well, there were no moderates from the beginning, but now
Yes.
it's the most radical part of the leadership that has the grip of the power. So don't think that it's can be very dangerous because we are talking about real fanatics that will not stop, and also perhaps they will do everything possible to get their bomb eventually, to get their hands on the nuclear weapon.
Yeah, that's scary. But I mean, to understand how the Iranian regime functions, it's they call it themselves the mosaic style, or I call it the multi-layered. When we look at the Iranian regime, yes, as you mentioned, and I totally agree with you, there are no moderates. It was just a charade for them to say that we're different and we have, let's call it an opposition,
Mhm.
a self-made opposition, but it's not. The multi layers of the Iranian regime, it comes in three layers. The first is the Ayatollah, which is the head of everything, and even the staged basically democracy that they have of electing a president and all that is just a show. So the first layer and the strongest of them would be the Ayatollah, and then we have the RGC and the military and they're basically uh, what do we call them cells, if we may, like the Shabag and all that, and then of
Sure.
course the president, the elected one. When we're talking about the Ayatollah, why was it dangerous for us to have the last of the founding Ayatollahs? Because the founding fathers of the revolution, the last of them in power was Khamenei.
Yeah.
And he himself was one of the founders of the RGC, and he had it for, I think, 2 to 3 years, something like that. He was the last person to have a grip over the RGC. With him being gone, there's a polar shift happening. The RGC will be on top of the Ayatollah. Any Ayatollah will come after will be controlled by the RGC. And that's the danger. Yet, with whatever happening today economically, when we say the RGC and the other fractions that go underneath it, they function with money, not creed. So without resources, and that's what's happening right now, without
Mhm.
proper resources and not paying, let's say Hezbollah, the Hashtabi in Iraq, and the others, they will suffer. And when they suffer, the numbers will diminish because they find new bosses. They are soldiers of fortune. They don't work for free. So
Sure.
it's either we will find them splitting out or merging out and then basically attack the RGC from outside, or it's exactly what we've been seeing happening over the past 1 year by the US and Israel buying those agents and make them act from within for the RGC and the other factors to explode or implode, right? So we've seen it happening in action. It's not impossible. It's just a matter of time for it to phase out.
How you say in Arabic, as-sabr khair.
While working on it, yes.
You have to have patience.
Yes. Yeah, patience while working.
Yes. All right. There is something else that I wanted to discuss with you, Ahmed, given your vast experience and also a thorough analysis of the Abraham Accords dynamics.
Mhm.
So it's somehow, it's almost 6 years. We
Yes.
will celebrate 6 years this year, which is
Yes.
unbelievable because, I remember it as it was yesterday.
I
And
agree.
somehow it's been already 6 years.
Mhm.
Many things happened during this time, and some of them, of course, I think that they slowed down this development. And this was, of course, the attack of Hamas by 10/7, and then the war in Gaza. And then, I, definitely can say it as an Israeli, the extremist, outlook of the current government in Israel. And then, of course, now with the war with Iran. Nevertheless, after almost 6 years, how can you, analyze, the dynamics of the accords that were signed, and what kind of future do you see, for that? Is there
Okay.
further developments along the way? How we will
Yes.
look like in another 6 years?
Yeah. Let's call what happened until now as Abraham Accords 1.0. Today we have to look forward to Abraham Accords 2.0 because let's put it that way. The signatories of the Abraham Accords On one hand, we're talking about the Arab states who know each other for a very long time and they have ties and basically they built up rapport compared to Israel, who's not known to us and we are not known to them, right?
Yeah.
So that being said, it was a good way of getting introduced to each other to see how fast of a pace each is going through. And I think the Abraham Accords achieved a lot and failed in some. Failed in the points where you just mentioned. If we're talking about October 7th, we're talking about 12-day war, we're talking about the ongoing war and other fractions. That's number one. Number two, which is more important, is on the economy, for example. If we're talking a best case scenario, we're talking about the UAE and Israel after the accords from zero to it was 150 mil until it reached the peak of bilateral trade that reached $5 billion per annum. See, that's an achievement. If we're talking about what happened last week, before the weekend, when Israel announced, I think, them selling the Iron Dome to the Emirates,
Right.
that's another level of it. But if we're looking at the downside of it, I won't call it a downside. I would call it a meet and greet phase where we started to get to know how we function. If you ask me of how I wanted to see the Abraham Accords happening was, for example, when October 7th happened, instead of taking all the responsibility and all the blame for whatever happened during and after the October 7th, I would have loved to see that the Abraham Accords to serve as an exclusive members club. So if you wanted to act as a mediator, join the Abraham Accords and act as a mediator from within, rather than sidelining the Abraham Accord signatories and deal with somebody else. That was one. Second, when it comes to the war, for example, the ongoing war, I think there's better collaboration, but the previous war, it was not. But we just said it. It's a learning curve. So if this war, we had better collaboration, it means we've learned from what happened last year. So it's a learning curve. That's why what I said by Abraham Accords 2.0, we have to sit and evaluate and list the pros and cons and see how can we fix what's missing. We are humans, and this is how we get better at what we do.
How do you think the Abraham Accord countries, the Arab countries, can positively influence, such issues such as the stabilization of the situation in Gaza, and also the Israeli-Palestinian dynamic to eventually result in, the peace agreement and hopefully, post-conflict reality?
See, this has two folds. One, we have to admit after 78 years now that the Arabs have no upper hand on the Palestinians. The Palestinians have their own will, they have their own plans, and they are free to act as is. The Arabs tried, but failed at that for many reasons. The second is the 6 years, the 6 past years, the Arabs understood more how the Israelis function. So I think the coming years should function as such to differentiate, first of all, about what could be done and what not, who's who when it comes to that. Because if we're talking about Abraham Accords, we're talking about Israel and a handful of Arab states. The Palestinians, where are they located when it comes to the Abraham Accords? Because until now, they are not. So if we're saying that...
Well, probably because they were not included,
I know. But even if they were included, how will they fit right in? Because part of the Abraham Accords was that for the region to move forward despite the issue of the Palestinians, right? Because everything was put on hold for the past 78 years because everybody wanted to find a solution for the Palestinian issue and then talk about everything else. That didn't work. So the Abraham Accords came in saying that, you know what? Fine, we acknowledge the Palestinian issue, but how about we move forward with the other stuff until we find a solution for that, not neglecting it. And somehow it progressed more than it did before. So in order for us to take it forward, we have to think of a dynamic of how to include the Palestinians in the Abraham Accords. That's number one. Second is for all sides, and when I say all sides, I'm not talking about the Israelis only or the Arabs only. both sides, for them to sit and say, where are the limits for that? Because whenever, for example, Arab states like Saudi Arabia, I mean, the biggest elephant in the room when it comes to the Abraham Accords, things were developing with Saudi, and Saudis were very clear out there in the open saying that we will be indulging the idea of the Abraham Accords and peace with Israel when we find a final solution for the Palestinian issue. So if that's the case, why don't we? We have a roadmap. How about we go from there and see if we can find, I'm not going to say final solution, but at least stepping points that we can build on in the future rather than where we're stuck right now.
Absolutely. So I can also add to that, in ROPES, we envisage a situation. It's not only us in ROPES, it's also other organizations, abroad and also in Israel, like Abraham Shield, of course,
Yes.
that think that two things can happen simultaneously.
Yes.
It's the solution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the integration at the same time, in the Middle East of both Israelis and Palestinians.
Yes.
Economically, you mentioned the economy. Well, so the situation is dire in West Bank, and actually we are looking into what is happening. We basically can anticipate some kind of collapse economically, and definitely there are a lot of things that can be done, but you have to be more creative, probably.
I agree.
So,
Yes.
yeah. Ahmed, before we will conclude, I also wanted to ask you, this is something that it's bothering, me and also many other, people in Israel that wish to have normal relations, with Arab countries, and we see ourselves as part of the region. Do you think that, not the leaders, but the regular people on the street in Bahrain, I don't know, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and all of these countries are different from each other. I know, I'm aware of that. Can in the end accept the existence of Israel? I will not go into definitions, what kind of, it's, existence of Israel and, to get over this nonsense of wiping Israel off the map. This is something that is very central for many people here, especially after 10/7.
That's possible under one condition today. And it's exactly what Saudi Arabia has been saying for a long time. Why don't we sit down on a table, start finding a solution for the Palestinian issue? Once the Arabs on the street see that the Palestinians are to find a solution or a final solution for their agony, let's call it, the Arabs will start accepting everything else. But before that, on the street, the regular man, woman, child will never accept it. We're talking about a growing minority of supporting the Accords until October 7th. That growing minority died after October 7th. So in order for us to re-put things on the table, everything to the Arab and Muslim mind today is tied to the situation of the Palestinians.
Do you think that the Arab Peace Initiative that was put on the table in 2002 is still there? Is it still alive? Is it still viable? Let's suppose that there is a leadership in Israel, there is some new leadership in Israel after the upcoming elections and so on, that will be, willing to examine it again. Do we need a new initiative by now? It's
No. I'll tell you one thing. Again, the regular people on the street, they don't want big words. They don't want to hear promises. They want to see their peers, the Palestinians, in a better condition. Once that happens, they will feel better. But to hear something and then see something on the news, of course, they will take few steps back.
Absolutely. Okay, with that, I would like to thank you very much for participation in the ROPESCAST, to be continued. There are many, fascinating issues that we didn't touch in this episode, but, if, inshallah, and if you will be willing, we'll be very happy to have you back.
Of course, it will be an honor.
Thank you very much, and you've been listening to the ROPESCAST, the independent voice of the Middle East. I'm your host, Ksenia Svetlova. To learn more about our work in ROPES, to support our mission of building regional integration, or to listen to more episodes, please visit our website at ropes.org. You can also follow us on social media to stay updated on our latest initiatives and also solidarity visits across the region. Thank you for tuning in, and we are looking forward to have you with us for our next episode. Shalom and salam.